Rayman 4 was the original title of the game, which later evolved into Rayman Raving Rabbids, beginning life as a traditional 3D platformer at Ubisoft Montpellier in late 2005 before growing into a party game for the Nintendo Wii. However, this was not the only project developed under the title of Rayman 4. In early 2005, Phoenix Interactive Entertainment became the first development studio to ever tackle a main series Rayman game outside of Ubisoft Montpellier. This little-known developer was entrusted with the rights as the Montpellier branch was engaged with work on a video game adaptation of Peter Jackson's King Kong movie. Phoenix gained access to the license with a proposal that supposedly captured the imagination of Ubisoft's higher-ups. The pitch presented story ideas high in ambition that aspired to break new ground not only for Rayman, but the medium itself. According to the design documents worked on over the course of development, it would have opened in a training camp for video game heroes. The player controls Rayman, where they learn the basic controls and wait to be chosen by a player in the real world. From this point, it would have been revealed that, in a very meta twist, every inhabitant of the game is completely self-aware that they exist within a video game. The premise was such that almost every character in the realm of the game was being controlled by a player in the outside world. Thus, the behaviour of each character you meet is in part a reflection of each individual player's personality in the real world. One example given was a seriously ill child controlling another Rayman. Each of the Rayman characters inside the game was essentially a piece of data, similar to the movie Tron for instance. However, they were also a blank slate for the players who would control them in the outside world, who were each tapping into a shared realm of gaming when they played what was to them the latest Rayman game. With Pixar as their main source of inspiration for the plot, Phoenix wanted to explore the relationship between player and video game, using Rayman as a template around which they could build a rich story with humanity, pathos, and depth. Humour was another big focus of theirs too. Outside of the general concept, a great deal of the story had yet to be figured out. There was no main villain in place. The closest that they had come to adding one was an antagonist encountered later in the game, which was Dark Rayman, a returning character introduced in the original Rayman game. Instead of being a creation of Mr. Dark, as he was in the first Rayman, Dark Rayman was intended to be a manifestation of corrupt data inside the video game, a rogue glitch that the game designers had neglected to stamp out and had adopted the form of the game's hero. One goal which Phoenix held dear with the project was keeping a reliance on cutscenes for storytelling to a minimum. It was instead thought of as having its story unfold dynamically in real time, using subtle techniques like small changes in the environments to convey information to the players. Despite its working title, Rayman 4, the game was intended to be a full-frontal reboot of the series. It was conceived as a revival of Rayman that took the majority of its inspiration for design and tone from the first two games. They wanted to recapture the off-the-wall style of the earlier entries and bring the series back to its roots. In order to accomplish this, the vast majority of the game would have reimagined past levels from Rayman 1 and 2. For the first time, players would have been able to explore stages from the original game, such as Bandland, in new 3D interpretations. Returning from Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc, power-ups played a major role in Rayman 4 stages. Although many of these never got as far as making it into any build of the game, Phoenix had in store a very diverse roster of quirky transformations for players to acquire, with the hope that this would inject plenty of variety into the gameplay. Another mechanic that they were planning for was vehicles. These included a submarine and a giant Rayman-shaped mech that he would have been able to pilot at various points throughout the game. Ubisoft and Phoenix were aiming to capture as big of an audience as possible with Rayman 4. Not only was it set to land across several different platforms, the PC, PS2, Xbox, and Gamecube, they were also hoping to increase the mass appeal of the series with it. Rayman 4 would have therefore been slightly easier than past installments. Phoenix even explicitly outlined in their design docs that 100% of players should be able to finish it. Overall, the project was in development for around 10 months. A great deal of pre-production had been spent carefully crafting the art of each level. Prototyping had been underway for some time as well, as we can see from this early build. Rayman 4 was ultimately able to reach a more complete state than this, with a handful of levels fully functioning, but in late 2005, all work on the title ground to a very sudden halt. At E3 2005 in May, Nintendo had unveiled to the world their new system, codenamed Revolution. The announcement had been fully expected, but had still managed to discreetly worry certain members of Ubisoft, fearing the success of their late GameCube projects, including Rayman 4. If this new console was to launch sooner than anticipated, along with the incoming Xbox 360, would it all have a negative effect on the performance of these games? This was very much the concern at hand. Then, later in the year, Ubisoft began receiving the first batch of development kits for the Revolution, as work on the King Kong movie game in Montpellier was drawing to a close. As the creative director of the King Kong video game, Michel Ancel, creator of the Rayman series, had previously been too busy to contribute towards Phoenix's Rayman 4 game. However, as development was preparing to wrap on the project, he began exploring new ideas for the next Rayman he would be at the helm of. It was at this point that Ubisoft's management very suddenly relayed to Phoenix Interactive that they had made the decision to cancel their version of Rayman 4. The aforementioned sales concerns and wanting to focus on building something from the ground up for Nintendo's next system are said to have been two major factors that played into the decision. For Phoenix, it had been the largest game the company had ever taken on, and they had relied on Ubisoft's funding to maintain their day-to-day operations. Without any prior indication of the project being in danger, Phoenix had no choice but to lay off the vast majority of their staff soon after. The duty of creating the next Rayman then reverted to Ubisoft Montpellier, where they started work on it towards the end of King Kong's development. A lot of Phoenix's greater plan for the game, like how exactly they would have presented certain aspects of its highly self-referential plot, had yet to be entirely figured out. The Montpellier team started afresh, with their own new vision for what the next entry in the series would be, and Phoenix's elaborate ideas for reviving Rayman were discarded almost completely. All that Ubisoft would ever use from the project were some of its level concepts, which were reworked into the Game Boy Advance version of Rayman Raving Rabbids. Phoenix Interactive Entertainment went on to develop one more game for Ubisoft, but due to another series of complications, it met the same fate as Rayman 4. This time, the cancellation had even more serious ramifications for the studio and left them unable to continue. In 2009, with the contract lost, the company was forced to close its doors for good.